Welcome to the High School Preview Show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Serenitas, and as always, I'm joined by the man who knows it all, Tyler Amaral. Tyler, how are you doing this evening? We're a day early. Usually we go on Wednesday nights. We're coming to you Tuesday night this week. But Tyler, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. I think this is my favorite weekend on the high school football calendar. I really enjoyed the semifinal week.
It's a fantastic weekend, and it's really, I think when you look at it, this is where you get into the juicy matchups, right? And I think that's what makes it great. And of course, each state has its own calendar. Vermont is done, but New Hampshire's got some big semifinal matchups this weekend. Maine has some championship matchups this weekend. Rhode Island has their state title games this weekend. Connecticut, it's a quiet week. You got Thanksgiving next week, which is there's some tremendous matchups. I mean, UCain and Darien it could be the best Thanksgiving game in the region this year. And then their playoffs start after Thanksgiving, which is the way it should be. But they're going to have some fantastic matchups. I can't wait to get into the CIAC matchup. So it's really, if you love high school football, this is such a great time of the year. And we're here to break down the Massachusetts matchups. We'll also take a look at some of the matchups in Rhode Island and Maine as well. And we'll also talk about one of the big ones up in New Hampshire, Pinkerton and Bedford, which is going to be a hell of a game. But before we do that, I do want to remind you that we are brought to you by Gold Athletics. Gold Athletics is your one-stop shop for fundraising. They have recently expanded into Maine and New Hampshire with Blaze and Jeff Whitman. They are ready to support even more programs across New England. Whether you're in football or any other sport, reach out to Gold Athletics and they'll make sure your program raises the money. All right, so you mentioned it's semifinal weekend. I mean, I can never get it right, by the way. I'm always like, oh, sectional final weekend. It's whatever. It's semifinal weekend. So we've got some great matchups, though, in Massachusetts. We're going to start with the MIAA matchups. Of course, the winners of these games advance to face off in the Super Bowl for each division. So obviously a lot at stake here. And we're going to start in Division One. And I love both of these matchups, Tyler. I think these are fantastic matchups. We got a big one with St. John's Prep and Needham. Needham has been impressive all year long. And look, they're the lone survivor in Division One when it comes to public schools. They're the only public school left in the bracket. They take on a St. John's Prep team that's been rolling along all year. Lost to CM a few weeks back, 34-0. But that game was very deceiving. At least the final score was. That game was 7-0 practically at the end of the first half. CM scored late to go up 14-0 in the first half. But St. John's Prep, for the most part, has been rolling along. They've looked like the favorite all year in D1. They're going to have their hands full, though, with Aiden Williams and the Needham Rockets. This is a big physical football team with plenty of D1 talent to match up against St. John's Prep.
Yeah, I think right after that CM loss, I think I mentioned on here that I thought that was a good thing for St. John's Prep. I thought it would motivate them. They had kind of been rolling along, and I thought they'd be able to make some adjustments coming out of that game. It looks like they have. They just beat a very good Methuen team 40-47 to hold that Methuen off as 7 points. Super impressive. I think one of the most impressive things from last weekend. We know what to expect from a St. Pierre coach team, right? They're going to play defense. They're going to be tough. They're going to be physical at the line of scrimmage, and they're going to be playing their best football in November. The added wrinkle this year is Chris Vargas in this passing game, which they haven't always had in years past, and they've still been able to win. Needham, public or private, doesn't matter. Not many teams have the size, physicality, strength, and running game that Needham has. Those things tend to lead to success in November. I think Needham really matches up well here in this game. I think they match up well with anyone in the state. I really like that physicality. Aiden Williams is playing great. Seems like Needham's kind of flipped the switch here in the playoffs too. They dominated a good Wachusett team and then beat up on Central Catholic 31-7. Really good, arguably the best defensive team in the state. I'm going with the upset here. I like Needham.
Yeah, this is a tough one for me because on the one hand, you look at St. John's Prep, and it's hard to pick against Brian St. Pierre and his program this time of year. Obviously, they won it 2 years ago, lost in a great game last year to Zavarian. It's hard to pick against them. I think the difference here for them is going to be Chris Vargas at quarterback. He's going to need to take care of the football. He's going to need to play smart. He's going to need to take what Needham gives him. He can't, as the old quarterback adage goes, you can't force sand up a flea's ass and try to put the ball in places where he shouldn't. He's the key to the game here because their running game isn't as strong as it usually is. Usually the prep is driven by their running game. Not the case this year. The passing game has been more of the engine to this offensive car, if you will. Needham, to me, is going to run the football. I think that they're physical enough that they can match up with the prep up front and get a push. Question is, do they have enough of a passing game to win a game like this? That's too big of a question for me. You're going with the upset special. I'm going the other way here. I like St. John's Prep. Look, both of these programs have been there in recent years, but it's hard to bet against Bryant St. Pierre and the Eagles. I think it's going to be a great game. I think it's going to be a close game. But I think in the end, Chris Vargas, Merrick Barlow, they make enough plays in the passing game to offset maybe the running game not being what it is. I think this will be a high-scoring affair. I'm going with the Prep. All right, next up, we have a Catholic Conference rematch. This game will take place on Saturday at 1 p.m. at Brockton High School. You've got Xaverian and BC High. And it's interesting, Tyler, because going into the year, we didn't really know what to make of this BC High football program. We knew the return of Paul Zakauskas taking over the program was going to be a good thing for this program long term. And that's not to say that Ed Manti didn't do a good job, but we all know that with BC High, family matters, alumni matters, and Paul Zakauskas was going to be a guy that was going to get the wheels going there and get the program heading in the right direction. They beat Xaverian earlier this season, so this is a rematch. It's hard to beat a team twice in the same season, but one thing we've learned about this Boston College high school football team is they are scrappy, man. They really are. They're tough. They play hard for Paul Zakauskas. This is a team that has what it takes to beat a team in Xaverian that, let's face it, on paper is more talented.
Yeah, and I think we have to mention that Busa didn't play in that first game. He's one of the better players in the state,
which is huge, by the way.
It is huge. Busa just picked up his first FBS offer from UMass last week. He's a great player, one of the better two-way players in the state. I think he's going to make the difference in this one. But this BC High team, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're able to beat Xaverian for a second time. I think Jackson Richard. We talk a lot about different backs and different players around the state. I don't think Jackson Richard's really gotten the respect and the credit that he deserves. He's been outstanding all year. He's kind of been the engine of that BC High team. So I think this is a true toss-up. I think Xaverian's fully healthy right now. You got Busa to complement Will Wood in the passing game, Funk and Amity on the defensive line. That's a duo that not many teams are going to be able to handle. I lean Xaverian here. I think it's going to be a great game, something like 24-21, 27-24. I think it's a one-possession game, but I like the Hawks to get back to Gillette.
Yeah, I do too. I think, look, you mentioned Busa. He's the difference here for me. He didn't play in the first matchup. He's back now. He's dynamic. He's explosive. He can make things happen in that offense. And I think you're going to get a rematch of last year's D1 Super Bowl. St. John's Prep Xaverian. I think this is going to be a good game. I think it's going to be a close game. But I think in the end, Xaverian has a little bit more. That proves to be the difference. I see them winning this game by 7 to 10 points. I like the X in this one. Next up, we're going to head over to Division II, and we've got two really good games here. I'm going to start with Catholic Memorial in Wellesley. This game will be played on Friday night, 6 p.m. kickoff at Weston High School. CM rolling along. Of course, you were there last week. 48-14 win over BR. BR threatened to make it a game there at the end of the first half, but CM was able to pull away and advance. Wellesley won a slugfest against Bishop Feion, beating the Shamrocks 14-7 to advance. Look, Catholic Memorial is the best team in the state. They pretty much have been all year long. They've had statement wins in arguably the toughest conference in the state to prove it. I'm not going to sit here and ask you, can anybody beat these guys? I think we all know that if anybody beats them, it'll be a daunting task. But I guess my question to you is, what does Wellesley need to do, in your opinion, to have a shot at pulling off the upset here?
I think it's just about finishing these sustained drives. Like Bridgewater Random was able to put some pressure on them, but they weren't able to finish. You mentioned that possession there towards the end of the first half. That game was 20-7. BR was threatening to make that a one-score game, 20-14, just before halftime, but they couldn't finish that drive. You have to capitalize on those opportunities, especially if you get in the red zone. If you're Wellesley, if you want to be able to pull off this upset. Now, Wellesley, they're an interesting team, right? Because a lot of people think about Lucas Prock in the offense. But last week they go on the road, beat Fian 14-7. So they're capable of winning these low scoring games. They've won low scoring games throughout the year. They've won shootouts. So I think they can play multiple different ways. It's really just going to come down to finishing drives if they even want to be able to keep this one close. And then on the other side, obviously much easier said than done. Nobody's been able to do it. But slowing down Mekhi Dodd, if you let him get chunk plays, 6 yards, 7 yards, that's fine. But you can't let him break that 70-yard run like he's done all season long. So, I mean, I think needless to say here, I'm going to pick CM in this game. I think Wells is a very good football team, and those are kind of some of the things that they're going to have to do to be able to keep this one respectable.
Yeah, and I think in order to beat a CM, you got to play almost the perfect game. You got to win time of possession. You got to take care of the football. Like you said, you got to finish drives, and defensively, you can't give up big plays. And that's a lengthy checklist. This is a good football team. And look, it's interesting because I was recently asked how do they stack up against their previous two Super Bowl teams from 21 and 22. And my response is I think that those teams might have been better on paper. They might have been deeper. But Mekhi Dodd, to me, might be the best back they've had in the DiBiase era since he's been there. I think when you look at that home run ability, we knew what Datrell Jones can do. We knew what Carson Harwood can do. And certainly Day had that big play ability. But this kid is special, man. And look, to come back from a torn ACL the way he has and to do what he's done, it's really impressive. And look, I think if Wellesley can find a way to control the line of scrimmage a little bit and keep him in check, they might have a shot. But again, that's way easier said than done because a great back, all he needs, as the great Gale Sayers once said, 18 inches of daylight. You give him a crease, he's gone if he gets into space. I think Wellesley can hang around for a quarter, maybe even a half, but in the end, the cream rises. Catholic Memorial's too talented. I'm picking the Knights to get back to the Super Bowl after not getting there last year. Of course, they lost to Marshfield, which brings us to our next game, which is Marshfield and King Philip. This game will be played on Friday night at 6 p.m. at Bridgewater Raynham High School. These two teams are very familiar with each other, Tyler. They have faced off 5 times. This will be the fifth playoff matchup in the last 10 years. Of course, they played in the Division II Super Bowl last year. King Philip winning that game 42-14. And, this Marshfield team, predominantly a junior team last year, senior team now. They've been kind of on a mission. They only have one loss. That was the St. John's Prep. They pretty much rolled everybody else. They have looked really good. Senior quarterback Tor Moss leading the way. You got Davin True, a running back. You got a really good skill group on the perimeter. King Philip, of course, is King Philip. I mean, they've been dominant this season. A couple of close games, Norwood and Foxborough. But outside of that, the Warriors are the Warriors. They've got 5 backs that they can throw at you. The defense, it's been typical KP. Starting defense has been unbelievable for KP. This is going to be a great matchup, and in many ways, a contrast in styles.
It is a contrast in styles, and I think Marshfield is better suited for a game like this this year than they were last year. So this Marshfield team, we know about the offense, we know about the explosive plays, we know about how quick they play, we know that they're going to be able to score points. But they've won some close games here. They won at Mansfield on the road in a low-scoring game at a last-second touchdown. So they've shown that ability to win close games and also win low-scoring games. I was impressed with their defense against Methuen earlier in the year. They got down 20 points early in that game, then only gave up 7 points in the last 35 or so minutes of the game. So this defense is a lot better, I think, than it has been in years past. So I think they're going to be up for the challenge. Of course, they're trying to avenge last year's loss. You mentioned that KP running game, though. We know about the line play. We know about that stable of backs. They're always going to have a fresh back. They're going to be able to run for 200 yards pretty much consistently against any opponent. I think that continues here. I think KP has these long, sustained drives. They're going to shorten the game. And I don't think Marshfield's going to be able to get off the explosive plays. I think Marshfield will get theirs on offense, but I think KP is the second best team on paper in Division II. I think they have the second best resume in Division II. So I'm going with the Warriors here. I think it's going to be a good one, though, much closer than last year's state championship game.
Yeah, it should be a good game, and I'm going to recuse myself from picking in this game because I'm going to be coaching in this game. So I'm not going to pick it. All right, we're going to move up. We're going to move along, rather, next to Division III. A couple of really good matchups here as well. We're going to start with the first matchup here, Reading versus North Attleboro. This game is going to take place on Friday night, 7 p.m. at Assabet Valley High School. Look, when you look at this matchup on paper, North Attleboro, Reading, two programs that are storied programs that have a lot of tradition, a lot of Super Bowl caliber tradition. Reading, it's been a while, coming off a bad year last year. They weren't great the year before either. They haven't been what they are normally, which is a team that you expect to make a run to Gillette. They feel like they're that team this year, though. Win undefeated, come from behind win against a good Milford team last week. North Attleboro got off to a really strong start, a little shaky down the stretch, but the Red Rocketeers have been dominant in the playoffs. Of course, you got Ryan Bannon. You've got Chase Frisoli. You got a physical offensive line. They can run the football. But their calling card this year has been their defense. Mike Strachan's done a great job with that side of the ball. They're going to have their hands full, however, with Murphy and Bursey and that Reading offense. This is a terrific matchup. And, when you look at picking games, Tyler, this one falls, at least in my opinion, it falls in the category of a toss-up.
I think it is a toss-up, and I've seen North a few times this year. I saw them against Taunton. I saw them against Mansfield. I saw them against Foxborough. And the one thing that stood out in every single one of those games is their defense. It's one of the best, if not the best defense I've seen all year. Bannon, of course, the Georgetown commit, outstanding player. He's probably the best linebacker in the state. He's a real difference maker, and he's turned into a workhorse on offense this year as well. They'll give him the ball 25 times, no problem. So he's really developed nicely on that side of the ball. You mentioned the offensive line. They have 4 seniors on that offensive line. Frisoli, a 4-year starter at quarterback. So there's a ton of big game experience on this North team. If you were asking me last week, I probably would have picked North to win this game. And I know this sounds like super corny, but I think Reading just kind of has like team of destiny vibes. Like they pull out that win last week against Milford. Doesn't matter. Throughout the year, they've been able to pull out any sort of game. They've been able to win with their defense. They've been able to win with their offense. They've been able to win shootouts. They've been able to win blowouts. They've been able to win close games, come from behind games in the playoffs there when they face some adversity against Milford. So I lean Reading here, and I really I'm getting those like championship vibes from this team. I think it's going to be a very competitive game, something like 20-17. I can't imagine they score more than 3 touchdowns against this North defense, but I think they do find a way to get it done by 3 to 5 points, something like that.
Yeah, this one's a tough one for me to predict. I talked to some people that felt that game last week against Milford was more of a blown opportunity from Milford than anything else. I don't want to take anything away from Reading because they've had a great year, and I don't think that's fair. I think that John Fiore and his staff do a great job there. They're perennially one of the best coach teams in the state. I know firsthand. I've had to go up against them. I think when you look at this game, though, I think it will be a low-scoring affair, and I think if there's one team that can slow this Reading offense down, I do think it's North Attleboro. North Attleboro's formula is pretty simple. They want to run the ball, control the clock, be opportunistic in the passing game, take their shots when they're there, and they want to lean on their defense, especially in the second half, to win them games. I think that defense is going to come to play. I'm going with North Attleboro here in what should be a really, really good game. All right, on the other side of the D3 bracket is a matchup that should be familiar to local football fans. These two teams played in the playoffs last year. They have met previously in Super Bowls as well. You've got Mansfield taking on Walpole. This game is going to take place on Friday night at 6 p.m. in Taunton. Mansfield was flown under the radar. This is predominantly a junior team. Senior class, their contributions are up front along the line of scrimmage. Not sure a lot of people were expecting a lot of this Mansfield program this year. It's Mansfield. It's Mike Redding, one of the best coaches in state history, so you always think they have a shot. Walpole got off to a terrible start again like they did last year, but they've really turned it on in the playoffs, coming off a big 35-14 win over Billerica. This is an intriguing matchup, Tyler, and it's a game that could end up being a shootout. It was a tremendous game. I covered this game last year. It was a tremendous game, and I expect this one to be no different.
I agree. I think it's going to be a great game. And I think we just need to take a second to talk about Coach Chris Sullivan and what he's able to do. You mentioned he beefs up the schedule for one, which I always applaud teams for really challenging themselves in the non-conference. So he's done that back-to-back years. And then they've kind of, backed into the playoff. Last year, I guess they were a little more hot going into the playoffs.
Yeah.
But they struggled throughout the regular season. And each year, both the last 2 years, and then they get to the playoffs, and it's just a whole different team. And you look at like a guy like Noah McKenzie, right? A Stonehill commit, very good player, one of the best quarterbacks in the state. And they're doing it with their run game, though, and guys, the backfield led by Dylan Needham. So they're really able to run the ball. They've been playing good defense here in the playoffs to hold Bill Rickett to 14 points. That's impressive. 2 road wins here. They're a really impressive team. I think this is probably the hardest game to pick out of the entire slate in Massachusetts this week. I lean Mansfield. I really don't feel comfortable with that, but I lean Mansfield. I think it's going to be like 31-28, 35-28, something like that. I'll be interested to see, though, if Mansfield can get this running game going. I saw them against North. The running game was really non-existent. Tommy Villette made some plays from the quarterback position with his legs, but the running game just really didn't exist in that North game. If they're not able to run the ball against Walpole, I think Walpole wins it. I do think they establish a run here, get some nice chunk plays in the running game, and win something like 31-28.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a shootout as well. I think it's going to play out similar to last year, except this year, I think the script is flipped. I'm going to go with Mansfield. That will give us an all-Hawk Division III Super Bowl. I think that this skill group, particularly this passing game, is really good. I think that if you're Mansfield, they wanted another shot at Walpole after last year and the way that game played out. Well, they're going to get that shot. I think the difference here is I don't think Walpole is as talented as they were last year. I think they're here because of Noah McKenzie, their running game, and their well-coached Chris Sullivan and his staff do a tremendous job, and I think that's why they've gotten to this point. But I think in the end, it's going to be a close game. I'm going to lean Mansfield here. But again, if you told me Walpole won this game on Friday night at 9:30, 10 o'clock, I wouldn't bat an eyelash. I think it's going to be one of the closer games of the weekend in these playoffs. You are watching the High School Preview Show presented by Gold Athletics. I'm your host, John Saranitas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, Tyler Emerald. Just a reminder that Gold Athletics is your one-stop shop for fundraising. They have recently expanded in Maine and New Hampshire with Blaze and Jeff Whitman. They are ready to support even more programs across New England. Whether you're in football or any other sport, reach out to Gold Athletics and they'll make sure your program raises the money. All right, next up, we're going to go to Division 4, where you have perhaps one of the best matchups of the weekend in any division, and that is Grafton Scituate. We're going to get to that in a sec, but we're going to talk about the other game here, which is Duxbury-Tewksbury. Duxbury barely escaped with a 30-27 win over a Canton team that proved to be pretty good this year. Tewksbury took care of business against Somerset Berkeley 40-20. We know Tewksbury's pedigree. Coach Aylward does a great job, a lot of formations, tough offense to defend, tough physical kids, but Duxbury is Duxbury. And Duxbury has been one of the standard blue blood programs in the state for the last 15, 20 years, really. It's no surprise they're here. They're Duxbury. The names change, but the success doesn't. It's still the same. I think this is a tremendous matchup. I think both of these games are terrific. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one, and it's a little weird, right? Because Duxbury and Tewksbury, one's from the north, one's from the south, but these are teams that have met a lot in recent years in the playoffs. They met last year. I think they met in 2019, 18, in 2016 maybe.
There's
They've met
a lot of familiarity there.
Yeah, they've met like 5 times in the last 8 or 9 years or something like that. So it's pretty crazy, but it should be a fun one. 2 championship level programs with a lot of pedigree. Duxbury almost got knocked off last week by Canton. Jack Reese made a big play, forcing a fumble there in the fourth quarter. I think he's one of the more unheralded players in the state this year. He's really emerged nicely for Duxbury. We know about Trevor Jones and what he brings to the table. Tewksbury's got an explosive offense, though. They're really able to score. They kind of pulled away from Somerset Berkeley last week. That game was close for a while, though, but the Redmen ended up pulling away late. There's a lot of talent on that offense. You talk about how Brian Aylward is able to give you some different looks. He gives you a lot to look at from a defensive perspective. So I think this is another real like toss-up sort of game here. Ultimately, I lean Duxbury. I think it's going to be a very competitive game. I think it's going to be a physical game. Again, these teams know each other. They respect each other. I lean Dragons, though, 24-21.
Yeah, I do too. I think that this is going to be a good game. I think it's going to be a tight game, but I think Trevor Jones and company get it done, and I think they pull it off. And Duxbury's back in a D4 Super Bowl defending their crown. And look, again, Tewksbury's had a great year, kind of flew under the radar, but this Duxbury team survived last week, and that proved to me that they have championship mettle. It's in their DNA. It's what they do. They get to Gillette. They compete and win championships. I think they get back there. Now the question is, who do they play? The next matchup is a tremendous matchup. You've got Scituate, who's been dominant all year, taking on a Grafton team that I think has flown under the radar for most of the year. I don't think people realize how good this team is. Terrific coaching matchup here. Herb Devine, Chris McMahon. This should be one of the best games of the weekend in Massachusetts, in my opinion. How do you see it playing out?
Yeah, I think I'll be there on Saturday. I'm really looking forward to this one. I've seen Scituate a couple times. I haven't seen Grafton in person this year, but I know what to expect from this team. I know what to expect from a Chris McMahon coach team. Either way, this is going to be a rematch of sorts. Duxbury, of course, beat Grafton in 2022. They beat Scituate last year and lost to Scituate in 2021. So there's a lot of familiar faces here in the Final Four in Division 4. These are kind of the usual suspects, the teams that you kind of expect to be in it every single year. This Grafton team, they play great defense. I mentioned Needham, maybe the best defense of the state. I think it's Needham, KP, Grafton. They're all kind of on the short list of best defensive teams in the state. The Gators can run the ball as well. I think they're going to be able to slow Scituate down. Like that, Scituate's been rolling really since they won that Foxborough game on the Hail Mary in week 1. I think it's going to kind of play out similar to that Foxborough game where it's kind of back and forth, low scoring game. I think this is, again, another like true toss-up type of game. I'm going to lean Scituate here, but I wouldn't be at all shocked if Grafton wins this game. I do lean Scituate, though, like 21-17, something like that, 20-17. It's going to be difficult to score on this Grafton team. Ultimately, though, I think that skill group at Scituate is just a little too strong. You talk about Johnny Donovan at quarterback. He gets better every single week, it seems. Willie Robinson, the Army lacrosse commit. Lawson Foley's an excellent receiver. I think there's just a little too much skill there. I like the Sailors, but this is going to be a great one.
Yeah, it is. I'm going to go with Scituate as well, but I'm with you. I would not be surprised if Grafton won. I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game than we've become accustomed with this Scituate team. They've been putting up big numbers all season long. I think that they are going to end up in a tight one here. And I'm with you. I could see this being a 21-14, 20-17 kind of game. I'm going to go with Scituate, but I think it's going to be a fantastic game. And like I said earlier, I think this sets up to be one of the best matchups of the weekend. Next up, we're going to go to Division 5. First matchup, we're going to look at D5. Sauchin Valley Tech is going to take on Old Rochester. This game is going to take place on Friday at 6 p.m. at Scituate High School. Interesting spot to have this game. I'm not sure why you're asking Sauchin to get on a bus and drive all the way to Scituate. Nonetheless, the Rams are highly motivated. Slinging Sid Tilsey and company have had a dominant run. They would love nothing more than to get back to Gillette and get another shot at Foxborough, possibly, if they advance. I think this is going to be a tremendous matchup. When you look at this bracket, Tyler, I don't think enough people talk about Old Rochester and the job that Bryce Chibo has done there. I mean, they're a program that perennially was in contention to get to Gillette. They've made a couple runs to Gillette. This is a good football team, though, that has flown under the radar for most of the season.
They have flown out under the radar, and they've been a consistent program for years now. But going back to the old format, they have made 3 straight state semifinal appearances, at least South sectional appearances. And they lost to the eventual state champion in all of those years. So this is an impressive program. They always play good defense, and they always run the ball. We talk about this every week, especially when we get into November. That's a recipe for success. This Sauchin team, though, they really loaded up on that strength of schedule this year. They played really good teams. They've added like Wayland to the schedule, for example. Beat Wayland 28-0. That's a very impressive win. That's a good Wayland football team. This Shawsheen team, this is kind of the senior class led by Sid Tilsley that they've expected to get to this level and to ultimately win a state championship. And I think they do get one step closer. I think they advanced to Gillette for the second time in 3 years. I expect this to be a really good game. I think it's going to be the most difficult game Shawsheen's played all year, but I like the Rams.
I do too. I think Tilsley is dynamic. I think that offense is dynamic. And I think the one thing that enough people aren't talking about when it comes to this Shawsheen team is their physicality. They're going to need that physicality against an old Rochester team that's old school on offense. They're going to run the eye. They're going to pound you. They'll sprinkle in a little bit of option. They're tough. But I think ultimately, if you get into a track meet type of game with the Shawsheen team, I just think that they can out-athlete you in space, and I think that there's a certain toughness about them. I think this game will be a good game. It'll be competitive, but ultimately I see Shawsheen getting back to Gillette. Next matchup we have is Foxborough-Hanover. That matchup will take place on Friday at 6:30. That game will be played at Plymouth South High School. It's a rematch of last year's D5 Super Bowl. Foxborough, of course, got off to an 0-3 start, slow start. They got their groove back, however, went on a run, and they've been dominant ever since, and they look like the presumptive favorite heading into the season. Hanover, I don't think a lot of people thought that they would be back in this spot, but I think it speaks to the fact that that is a program now. There's an expectation and a tradition there that must be upheld, and they've done a really good job. You're going to give the Hawks credit getting here. However, they're going to have their hands full with a Foxborough team that brings back most of last year's Super Bowl team.
So Foxborough, the strength of schedule, like regardless of divisions, pretty much unmatched. You look at some of the teams they played this year: Situate, Division 4 semifinalist; KP, Division 2 semifinalist; Walpole, Division 3 semifinalist, and then they played a struggling this year Lincoln Sudbury team, but again a bigger program, Division 1 program that's had success. And then they get into conference play and they win. They beat a very good Canton team. They beat a very good North Attleboro team. Again, North Attleboro, Division 3 semifinalists. So this strength of schedule, I think it's really going to pay dividends. In this one, they're battle tested. They're not going to. I think you mentioned this last week. They're not going to back down from anybody in Division 5, regardless who's on the other side. So I think Foxborough, once they got Bed Angelini back and once they got him back into full swing, it changed everything. He's a dynamic back. He's a workhorse back. He can handle the ball 25, 30 times a game, and they're going to really lean on him. And then that opens up the passing game. You talk about guys like Marcachella and Gordon. They can really throw the ball as well. And they've got some nice secondary pieces. Cam Dulesky, a two-way player. He's a slot guy on offense, corner on defense. He's really emerged this year as a playmaker on both sides of the ball. So I think Foxborough is just too deep. I think they're too physical. They're more battle-tested than Hanover is. But this Hanover team, you mentioned they're building a program. They certainly are. Guys like Tyler Vincent, Aiden Booten on offense. It's a good team. They're a good team, and it's a good program. But I lean Foxborough here. I think they're just too much.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Foxborough as well. I just think ultimately you hit the nail on the head. Strength of schedule. They played arguably the hardest schedule in the state this year of any team. If certainly not the hardest, definitely in the top 5. But this is also a veteran group. They got to Gillette last year. They won it. They've had a taste of it. They know what it takes to get back. We know Jack Martinelli, over 300 career wins. That staff has been together for a long time. This is a program that's built to get back there and go back-to-back. I think that they're well-positioned to do that. Hanover might push them for a half, but I think ultimately Angelini, that running game, Foxborough's physicality, that proves to be the difference. I'm going to take the Warriors in this one. All right, next up, we're going to go to Division 6. First matchup we're going to take a look at is Hudson and Norwell. This game will be played on Saturday at 7:30 at Mansfield High School. Hudson, of course, has had a tremendous season. Attaway, obviously a quarterback, one of the top signal callers in the state. Their offense is explosive. They put up a lot of points. Their defense has been very good, underrated because people focus so much on Attaway in the offense, but Norwell is no slouch. But I think when you look at this matchup, Tyler, I think they're going to have their hands full with a team in Hudson that, dare I say, has that team of destiny vibe.
Yeah, I think this honestly, like I think that sandwich team is very good, and I saw them play a couple weeks ago, and they scored in the fourth quarter and make that a one-score game. So I was honestly pretty surprised by that. And that just speaks volumes to what Hudson is, because that sandwich team is very good, and I expected them to win that game by multiple scores. Hudson's a very good team. Again, this is a team that you talk about that they've been building towards this for a while now. Last year, they made it to a semifinal appearance when they lost to Fairhaven, the eventual champion. So I think they're ready to take that next step this year. I think it's just kind of one step at a time here, getting further each year. It's an enormous senior class, a very decorated senior class. Attaway, of course, one of the most decorated quarterbacks in state history, 10,000 career total yards. It's just a remarkable feat. I believe unofficially he's closing in on the all-purpose touchdown record from a quarterback perspective. So rushing and throwing touchdowns from quarterbacks. I believe he's closing in on Troy Flutie's record. So he's one of the best quarterbacks that we've seen in quite some time, especially at a D6 program. I think Hudson, they've just got too much offensively. You mentioned that defense. They do play good complementary football, but that offense is really high flying. I like Hudson.
I like Hudson too. I think Norwell's running game could keep them in this. And certainly if it goes into the fourth quarter, it's anyone's game. We saw that last week. Hudson had to hold on to beat Sandwich. I think that they do a little bit better this week. I think, again, like I said, they've got this team on a mission vibe. They're a team of destiny. I think they do get to Gillette. I think this is a good game, but ultimately Attaway, that passing game, his dual threat ability, he can make plays on the ground. That proves to be the difference. I'm going Hudson in that one. All right, next up we have Fairhaven and Swampscott. I don't think a lot of people thought Swampscott was going to get here, but Peter Bush has done a great job with this team. Really, they've been a surprise. I mean, again, I think going into the season, Swampscott was one of those teams I think people thought could be in the mix. All of a sudden now they find themselves here taking on the defending D6 champs, Fairhaven, who survived in overtime over Linfield, of course. Fairhaven and their option offense is powered by fullback Justin Marks, who is probably the best back in the state, if not the best back in the state, one of the best backs in the state, certainly. We have a lot of good ones this year. Of course, we mentioned some of them earlier. But this is a pretty intriguing matchup. Contrasted style. Swampscott wants to spread you out, throw the football. Fairhaven wants to ball control you, run marks, run their option game, and set the pace early. This is going to be a fun one to watch, but this is one of those games that I think, again, when you look at Swampscott, all of a sudden they're a team you got to take serious here. This is a game that can go either way. This game will be played on Saturday at 4 p.m. at Milford High School.
So I saw both of these teams last week. I just want to give a quick shout out to that Linfield team. That game could have gone either way. Truly, probably the top 5 game I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years in high school. It was an incredible game. Had everything you want, from Marks breaking the state record for career touchdowns to every time Fairhaven scored, Linfield would answer. Tyler Adamo, one of the most impressive quarterbacks I've seen in person this year. He's, of course, the Columbia baseball commit. Outstanding career for him. So that Linfield team was very impressive. That was a true toss-up game. Came down to a 2-point conversion in overtime. Fairhaven, man, they're just resilient. They're a resilient team. Every time Linfield answered their punch, they threw another punch back and took the lead. We know about Marks, but Cam Burke and Aaron Legue, they're nice complementary pieces to Marks. And they have an offensive line that has a lot of experience. And, of course, Coach Almeida has the big game experience. And, again, there's no way to replicate this scheme, this team and this offensive style in practice. With that said, though, if there's any defensive coach in the state that can drop a game plan to stop this, it is Peter Bush. He's one of the best defensive minds in the entire state. And we saw that last week against Stoneham. Entirely different style, right? The triple option versus the double wing, but two teams that really want to grind you out, and two teams that could put up points out of those respective offenses. And Swampscott really shut down that Stoneham team, almost shut out that Stoneham team. Stoneham didn't score until 3:21 left in that game. And then they were able to rally on offense and score and win that ball game. Sophomore quarterback John Bombarda, he's really kind of emerged here. He led them on that game-winning drive against Stoneham. He's an impressive player. I think, again, if any coach could stop this triple option offense, I think it would be Peter Bush. I think Fairhaven, they have that big game experience. They have Marks. I think that's going to make the difference here. Marks probably scores 2 or 3 times. Really tough to keep him out of the end zone. I think it's going to be a good one, though, something like 21-14, but I got Fairhaven.
Yeah, I'm going to go Fairhaven as well, and I do think that they're going to run the ball enough to slow this thing down and keep the score down. I'm with you, 21-14, 20-14 kind of game. I think ultimately, though, Marks in that running game is just too much. I agree with you. Coach Bush is a hell of a coach, and I think he's going to have a good plan in terms of how to slow them down. And I think Swampscott will. But this Swampscott offense has come on of late, but I think that it's a tall ask it's a tall order to ask them to win this game because again, their possessions are going to be limited by this Fairhaven running game and this offense. I think ultimately they do enough to squeak by, go back to Gillette where they're going to take on a Hudson team that is potent. That could be one of the best Super Bowl matchups we get during Super Bowl week. All right, next up, we're going to go to Division 7. We have Uxbridge taking on Northbridge. I'm calling this the La Chapelle Bowl. Uxbridge coming off a 42-0 win over Gardner. Northbridge beat Millbury 19-14. This game will be played on Saturday at 1 p.m. at Milford High School. This is going to be a tremendous game. You talk about teams that have flown under the radar, Tyler. I think this Uxbridge team is a team that has flown under the radar. They're the defending Division 7 champs. Matt Blood has done a terrific job with the Spartans, team that I think more people need to talk about. But this is going to be one hell of a game. This could also be a high-scoring affair.
Yeah, I think that's appropriately named as well, the La Chapelle Bowl. La Chapelle's on both sides. It's going to be a really fun one. They also meet on Thanksgiving, so these teams know each other well, of course. Uxbridge, they're not quite as dominant as last year's team, but they're still clearly the favorite in Division 7 in my eyes. La Chapelle and Roseboro, these guys are just, they've been there, they've done that. They continue to produce this year. I think this is going to be competitive for quite some time. I think it's going to be one of the more competitive games Uxbridge has played this year. I think they have too many horses, though, and they end up pulling away, winning this one by 10-14 points, something like that. I think it's a 2-score game. I've got Uxbridge.
I'm going to go with Uxbridge as well. Like I said, I think that they're highly underrated. I don't think enough people talk about the program. They don't give Coach Blood enough credit. He has built a hell of a program there. I think Northbridge, certainly they could score. Obviously they have their own La Chapelle at quarterback that can make plays in Joel La Chapelle. But I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is this Uxbridge team is battle-tested. They've been there before, and this offense is tough to stop. I think they win what could end up being a shootout. All right, next up we have Mashpee hosting Clinton. Mashpee versus Clinton. This game is going to take place on Saturday at 4 p.m. at Mansfield High School. It's nice to see Mashpee back here, a program that in the mid-2010s was on quite a run there. It seemed like they were Gillette every year. Matt Trivieri does a great job there with that program. They're going to take on a Clinton team that coming into the season we all thought could be pretty good out of Central Mass. They lived up to the hype. This should be a pretty fun matchup.
Yeah, they did live up to the hype. They lost 2 games earlier in the season, but they lost to 2 very good teams. No shame in that. This Clinton team, they're playing really well. I think this is going to be a really competitive game. I think this is going to be sort of a back and forth affair. I think something like 24-20, 26-22, something like that is going to be the final score. I think it could go either way. Both teams have a lot of skill. I lean Clinton here to set up an all Central Mass matchup. Again, though, I wouldn't be at all surprised if Mashpee pulled this one out.
I'm going to go with Mashpee here. I think that, like I said, this is a program that I think a lot of people at the beginning of the year thought could be one of the better teams on the Cape. They proved to be that. Clinton has also proven to be a good football team. I think this is going to be a close game. I think it's going to be up for grabs in the fourth quarter, but it's that time of the year where I have a really hard time betting against Coach Triveri and Mashpee. I'm going to go with Mashpee here in what should be a close one. All right, finally, we're going to wrap up our MIA preview here with 2 games in Division 8, Randolph versus Neshoba Valley Tech. This game will be on Saturday at noon at Woburn High School. Randolph, of course, coming off a 40-day win over Narragansett Regional. And Neshoba Valley Tech beat Cathedral 22-0.
Yeah, I mean, probably the best season in program history for Neshoba Valley Tech. First time ever winning 10 games. I say it every week, but Danny Kelly's done an outstanding job with this team. Guys like Chase Carney, Zach Deshane on offense, they can really run the ball. They can really put a lot of pressure on defenses. But this Randolph team, they're a lot bigger than most teams you see up front in Division 8. And again, they've got that stable of backs, and they've got a coaching staff that's been here. They've made a run to Gillette. They've won a state championship. So I think Randolph ultimately has too much speed and too many playmakers. When you talk about guys like Makai White, Abe Cornett, Haggai Joseph, and then recently Seneca Spencer kind of emerged as well. So I think the Blue Devils have a little bit too much firepower for Neshoba Valley, but it's been one hell of a year for the Vikings.
Yeah, it has. And you mentioned Coach Kelly. He's done a tremendous job. I got to make sure I get him on the coaches chat this offseason. I'm going to go with Randolph here as well. I think Coach Marshall's done a great job there. You mentioned their depth at running back. They lose Gomes early in the year, but they don't skip a beat. The machine keeps churning there. They run one of the toughest offenses to defend in Division 8 with their multiple wing T offense, where they can really muck it up if they need to, but they can also get to the perimeter and make big plays. I think ultimately Neshoba Valley Tech hangs in there for a little while, but this Randolph team, especially those backs, are too talented. Give me the Blue Devils in that one. And finally, we have a rematch of the D8 Super Bowl from last year, Carver versus West Boylston. Mike Ross getting his team to Gillette at this point has become like death and taxes. Carver is back there. Carver could potentially get back there for a second straight year, but they're going to have to get through one of the best programs in the state the last few years.
Yeah, I think this year has been super impressive for Carver. When you talk about that senior class that they lost, all those playmakers, specifically quarterback Tyler Lennox, a bunch of those receivers, and then also Coach Ben Schufin. So they lost so much, and they're back here at the first-year head coach. Tyler Lennox Jack Balzerini made the switch from running back to quarterback, and all he's done is produce. They haven't really dropped off much offensively. Last week he had 7 touchdowns. He threw 7 touchdowns against Bourne. So he's really producing at a high level. That Carver offense can score, but I think West Boylston's going to shorten this game sort of like they did last year. They're going to churn out these running yards, and they're going to play good defense. I like the Lions here. It's just really hard for me to bet against Coach Ross at this point.
It is. And I agree with you. I'm going to go with them as well. To your point about them shortening the game and keeping the score down, I think they're going to do that. I think this Carver offense needs those extra possessions to win this game. I think they're going to keep it close. I think it's going to be a more competitive game than last year. But I think ultimately West Boylston finds a way to pull it out in the end, and they will return to the Super Bowl, looking to make it 3 in a row. Remember, 2 years ago they won the D7 Super Bowl. Last year they won D8. They're looking for the three-peat. It'll be a tall order against the talented Randolph team, but that'll be another great game. That'll be one of the best games of Super Bowl week here in Massachusetts. All right, we got a few minutes left here. We do want to get into the Rhode Island Super Bowl matchups. You got the Rhode Island State Championship games this weekend. We're going to start with the Rhode Island State Championship game, which is going to be played this Friday night at Cranston Stadium. All the games are going to be played at Cranston Stadium. Our Charlie Adams will be there all weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He's going to have full coverage of all of the championship games in Rhode Island, so we're really excited about that. Of course, we're going to cover all the championship games in Massachusetts. We're going to cover all the championship games in Rhode Island, and we will be covering all the championship games in Connecticut as well the second Saturday in December. We also hope to be able to get up to Maine and New Hampshire here in the next couple of weeks. We shall see. But first matchup here, Bishop Hendricken and LaSalle. I mean, you talk about like death and taxes. These two meeting in either the D1 state title game or the state title game is a fait accompli every year. Hendricken was the number 1 seed. Kind of a disappointing year by their standards. They played a really tough schedule. Coming into this one at 6-4, LaSalle coming into this one at 7-3. It's Hendricken, LaSalle. They met in the halfway point of the season. Hendricken won that matchup 24-6. It's hard to beat a team twice. Can the Hawks beat LaSalle again, or will LaSalle turn the tables on them like they did a couple of years ago?
Yeah, you mentioned Hendricken. They're not at quite the elite level that they have been at in the past. But still, Hendricken is Hendricken. We know what we're going to get from a Keith Croft coach team. I think this is going to be closer than that first game. I think it's going to be a 1-possession game. But ultimately, I think Hendricken wins this one, and they're the state champs again.
Yeah, this one's a tough one for me because I think that you got to give Jeff Marcone credit. Like Hendricken, LaSalle plays as good a schedule as anybody in Rhode Island. They usually play one of the best schedules in New England. They're battle tested as well. I think it all comes down to their ability to score first. They were able to do that a couple years ago in this game, and Hendricken came back. It was nip and tuck, and in the second half, LaSalle was able to pull away. This game has to play out the same way for them to win it. I think it does. I think this Hendricken team is a good football team, and it's hard to bet against Lynch and that offense. Laura, they can make big plays, but I think Perry and company get theirs. I think Terrence Campbell gets rolling, and I think once he gets rolling, I think he has an opportunity to take a game over. He did 2 years ago. I think he could do it again. I'm going with the Rams in this one. Next up, we have North Kingstown and Burrillville in the Division I bowl game. Look, Burrillville's had a nice season. They've been a pleasant surprise. They're going to run the football. They're going to play good defense. They can score points as well. We've seen them do that in these playoffs, but they want to play a tight game. But so does North Kingstown. This isn't the North Kingstown that we saw last year that was athletic and explosive. They've had to lean on their defense in these playoffs to get through. I think this is a good matchup here. It's a 5-7 matchup in Division I. I'm going with the Skippers here, even though they're coming into this. They came into the playoffs with a 5-3 record. They've played a really good schedule. They've been battle tested out of state as well. I think that they ultimately find a way to pull this out and win a Division I championship.
I agree. I like the way, if you asked me this, 5 or 6 weeks ago, I probably don't say North Kingstown, but I'm going with North Kingstown in this one as well. I think they're playing good football right now at the right time.
Yeah. I'm going to go with North Kingstown as well. The Division II game features South Kingstown, the Rebels taking on West Warwick. Wizards have had a nice year, but the Rebels at 9-1, they've been one of the best teams in Rhode Island from start to finish. I'm picking them here. I don't see West Warwick, I think, can hang for a half. I think they can make this a game, but South Kingstown has been very impressive. And really, when you look at them this season, if you want to talk about teams that have flown under the radar throughout New England, I think that this is a team that has flown under the radar throughout New England. They've been terrific all year long, and I think they cap off a special season with a state title.
I agree. I think it's more like I think this is probably – to me, this is more difficult to pick than the first 2 games we just discussed, but I do lean South Kingstown. I think it's going to be – their defense has played really well this year, so I think it's going to be something like 21-14. I think they're going to continue kind of that good defense, that nice defensive streak, and they're going to win this one.
Yeah, in D3, you've got Classical and Pontigansett. Pontigansett has had a great season, but Classical is a wagon led by perhaps the best player in Rhode Island, and Jordan Duke. He has been fantastic for Classical. Purple are rolling. They hung 56 on Rogers last week, winning 56-22. No one has been able to stop Duke all year. No one's been able to stop that offense. They have been rolling from start to finish. I think they seal the deal here and win a Division III state title.
Well, they're both coming in with only one loss. I think this is kind of a toss-up as well. I think I lean Pontigansett. I think they're gonna not completely stop Classical, but I think they're gonna be able to slow them down enough, get stops when it matters. Something like 30-28, 28-24, something like that.
Pontigansett can score too. I mean, they scored 53 in round 1 against North Providence. Mm-hmm. I just think, again, when you're talking about a dynamic, skilled player like Duke, he can create a lot of problems for you in a bunch of different ways, and I like the way that Classical coaching staff uses him. Pontigansett, again, another program that has had a really good year, got a lot of people's attention early on, and they've been able to carry the play, if you will, the rest of the way. But again, I think it's tough matching up against that Classical offense, although I do agree with you that could be a high-scoring game. And finally, in Division IV, Narragansett has been a pleasant surprise this year. They've had a great season. They take on Davies Career and Tech. Davies has been pretty good the last couple of years. They find themselves in the championship game. Of course, these 2 teams will face off on Saturday at noon. Again, as I mentioned earlier, our Charlie Adams will be there all weekend for all your Rhode Island state title coverage. So make sure you're following him along on X I'm going to go Narragansett in this one. I think that they've had a special season. As I said earlier, I think Davies is a good program. They've established themselves as a good program in D4. But this Narragansett offense has been putting up big points all season long. They're tough to stop. I think they get it done here.
Yeah, you mentioned it's difficult to beat a team twice in a year. Davies did beat Narragansett earlier in the year in September, and it was a close game. So it's especially tough to beat a team twice when the first game was a close one. I think Narragansett gets some payback here, and they're the state champs.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people forget that they won the first matchup earlier in the year, including me. But I do agree with you. I think it is. I've said this for 30 years in coaching. In high school football, it is tough to beat a team twice, and I think this Narragansett team has been rolling going into the playoffs. I think that this is another one that could be a high-scoring affair, and I think that they get it done and win. Quickly, I do want to go up to New Hampshire. I love the Division I matchups in the playoffs up there this weekend. Of course, you've got the Division I playoffs as well as the Division II semifinals before you get to championship weekend. Division I, we have Pinkerton taking on Bedford. Of course, Bedford is looking for a three-peat. They have been on a roll all season long. Quarterback Jack May leads one of the best offenses in the Granite State. They take on a Pinkerton team that got off to a good start, beat Andover to open their season. I think a lot of people thought, okay, they could be a potential threat to Bedford. They ended up losing the first matchup. Look, I don't put anything past the Brian O'Reilly coach team. They run that wing tee as well as anybody. They certainly have the ability to slow a game down and force you to play at their pace. I just think Bedford will be challenged. Bedford hasn't been as dominant these last few weeks as we saw earlier this year, but it's hard to pick against Zach Matthews and the Bulldogs, man. They have had a tremendous run here, and I think it continues. I'm picking Bedford.
Yeah, I'm going Bedford too. They're the class of New Hampshire. They play great defense. They have that championship big game pedigree. Until somebody knocks them off, I'm going with the Bulldogs.
Yeah, me too. I'm going with the Bulldogs as well. And, of course, the second matchup features Londonderry against Exeter. Exeter, of course, went undefeated this year at 10-0. But Jimmy Lozon and the Lancers, that's a program that's got championship experience as well. That being said, I think this Exeter team has flown under the radar all year long. Put some respect on them. I think that they are good enough not only to win this game, but to potentially put a scare into Bedford and possibly win a state title. Give me Exeter in what should be a really good game.
Yeah, Exeter first got my attention when they won the out-of-state contest against Portland, Maine. That was an impressive win in my eyes. I really like the way this Exeter team's playing. Undefeated on the year. I think that streak continues, and they advance here.
Yeah, and then you have the Division II state title game. You've got Sohagen against Pelham. What a surprise. Seems like these two are playing for it every year. Pelham had some turmoil at the beginning of the season. They ended up having a coaching change over the summer, but they were able to rally the wagons, if you will, and have a great season. They finished 10-1. They take on a Sohagen team that finished 9-2. I think this is going to be a fantastic matchup, but give me the Pythons here. I think they get it done, and I think they win Division II.
Yeah, I think it'll be a little bit closer than the first meeting. I think it's probably a one-score game, 6, 7, 8 in that range. I lean Pelham here, but it should be a fun one.
And then finally in D3, we have Interlakes, Molten Borough versus Campbell. Campbell undefeated this year. They're a wagon. You got Hirschberger at running back. I mean, they could score a lot of points. Like I said, ILM has had a nice season, but I think that this Campbell team has been a wagon for a while in D3. I don't see that changing. Give me Campbell here to win it in D3.
Yeah, I got Campbell too. They haven't even played a competitive game really this year, so I think that continues.
Yeah, no, they haven't. They've been one of the more dominant programs in the region all season long, and unfortunately, I don't see that changing this weekend for Molten Borough. All right, next up we have the state title games in Maine. Class A, we've got Portland at 9-2 taking on Thornton Academy at 11-2. That game, of course, will be at Fitzpatrick Stadium. Should be a fantastic matchup. It's hard to pick against the Trojans, though. They are the standard in Maine. And as much as it pains me, I think Coach Green and Portland, they've done a great job. Bulldogs certainly have what it takes to win this game. They can win this game. They've proven that they can win this game. But to me, I think in the end, Thornton Academy has just a little bit more, and I think they get it done and win the state title again.
Yeah, I think this is another game that we're going to see the losing team that lost a close game earlier in the year get some revenge here in the state championship game. I think it's going to be pretty similar to that first game, low-scoring game, 17-14 Thornton is what I'm thinking here.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Portland did beat them this year. They know they could beat them. But, I mean, again, this Thornton team, it's a program of tradition and history. They've done a lot of winning up there. I agree with you. I think it's going to be low scoring, but I'm going Thornton. In Class B, you have Falmouth versus Kennebunk. Both teams undefeated at 11-0. Both teams have had great seasons. I'm going Kennebunk in this one.
I am too. I mean, this is probably one of the more difficult ones to pick across the region this week. You mentioned they're both undefeated. I think I lean Kennebunk here. Again, this is one of those ones where I'm picking Kennebunk, but I don't feel super confident in that pick.
All right, next up we have Class C where Freiburg takes on Herman. Freiburg comes in at 10-2, Herman at 9-2. I'm going Freiburg in this one.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with these two teams, honestly, but I'll go with Freiburg here.
And finally, the Class D matchup pits Foxcroft at 12-0 versus Wells at 11-0. These two programs have both had great seasons. It's hard for me to pick against Wells. I'm going to go Foxcroft here, but this game could go either way.
I think I've got Wells in this one. They've been an impressive team throughout the year, so I've got Wells.
Yeah, should be a great game. So, again, get out there and enjoy all the playoff football. There's a lot of it. You got state title games in Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine. Obviously, here in Massachusetts, you're going to have your state title games here in a couple weeks after Thanksgiving. And as I mentioned earlier, Connecticut is wrapping up their regular season. They'll play Thanksgiving next week, and then the CIAC playoffs kick off after that. And, of course, we'll have you covered throughout the CIAC playoffs as well, and we'll be there the second weekend in December covering those games. All right, well, that'll do it for this week's episode of the High School Preview Show. For Tyler Amaral, I'm John Serenitas. Get out there and enjoy the games. It should be a great weekend of high school football action.